Two people are dead in Ibadan. The government's own deputy governor showed up at the scene within hours, and the first thing he did, before announcing an investigation, before naming a single suspect, was something you don't usually see a Nigerian official do this fast. He stood in front of cameras and told the public in plain terms that what just happened was not what it looked like. A Yoruba man is dead, a Hausa man is the alleged killer, property is burned, youths are in the streets, and yet the state's most senior response, repeated by the deputy governor, repeated by the local government chairman, repeated by the Olubadan of Ibadan land himself, is a single coordinated line: this is not ethnic. So here's the question nobody's really sitting with. If the facts on the ground look exactly like a tribal flashpoint, why is nearly every arm of Oyo State's power structure racing in near identical language to say it isn't one? That's not a small detail. That's the story. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Naija Insight Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now because this conversation is about to get deeper. Let's establish exactly what happened because the sequence matters. Tuesday night in the Ojoo area of Ibadan, specifically the Strabag axis inside Akinyele local government area, a commercial tricycle operator, a Yoruba man, got into a dispute with a point-of-sale operator over a transaction. Some accounts say the POS transaction failed and the argument escalated from there. By the accounts most widely reported, the tricycle operator was stabbed to death allegedly by a Hausa scrap collector in the area. That killing didn't stay contained overnight. By Wednesday morning, colleagues and relatives of the dead man moved on the Strabag area in what multiple outlets describe as a free-for-all, a direct retaliatory confrontation with Hausa scrap collectors and, by some accounts, boiler boys working in the same trade. Shanties believed housing scrap collectors were set ablaze. Gunfire was reported from a rocky outcrop overlooking the area, allegedly fired by people sheltering there, is what pushed the death toll beyond the original single killing. By Wednesday, Oyo State government confirmed the clash had produced multiple fatalities. Officials initially cited 2, though subsequent reporting from other outlets put the number as high as 4, with injuries running into the dozens. Traffic on the Iwo Road Ojoo corridor, one of Ibadan's busiest arteries, was paralyzed. Businesses in the area, including the Ojoo Motor Park, shut down. Why is this breaking now, and why does it matter beyond one bad night in one neighborhood? Ojoo isn't some obscure corner of Ibadan. It's a major commercial and transit hub, and it's one of several points in the city where Hausa migrant communities, largely working in scrap collection, transport, and petty trade, live alongside Yoruba residents in close daily economic contact. That proximity is normally the source of the city's famous cosmopolitanism. Ibadan has hosted a significant Hausa community for generations, concentrated in areas like Sabo, without it becoming a flashpoint. So the real question isn't, can Yoruba and Hausa communities coexist in Ibadan? History answers that already. The question is, what changed on one Tuesday night to turn a personal dispute into a communal fire? Here's where it gets structurally interesting, because multiple institutions moved in near lockstep, and that coordination itself tells you something. First, the Oyo State government, through Deputy Governor Bayo Lawal, standing in for Governor Seyi Makinde. Lawal didn't just appeal for calm, he delivered what amounts to a formal state position. Criminals are simply criminals, and criminality has no tribal identity. He repeated a version of that line at every subsequent stop. That's not an offhand remark. That's a government consciously and deliberately refusing to let a criminal matter calcify into a communal narrative, and doing so within hours, not days. Second, traditional authority. The Olubadan of Ibadan land, Oba Rashidi Ladoja, issued his own statement, separately through his media aide, invoking the idea that Ibadan has become home to people of different ethnic, religious, and ideological backgrounds. When a traditional ruler steps in alongside elected government within the same 24 to 48-hour window, that's not coincidence. That's the state's dual power structure, statutory and traditional, moving together because both understand the reputational and security stakes of an ethnic clash label sticking to Ibadan. Third, security institutions. The Nigerian police, through the Police Public Relations Officer, confirmed operational control had been restored, and the Oyo State Joint Security Task Force, Operation Burst, was deployed alongside regular police and, by some accounts, military elements. Arrests have reportedly been made, though as of this recording, no suspect names or charges have been made public. And fourth, local government. The Akinyele LGA chairman was on record making the same argument Lawal made, almost word for word, that in a mixed community, when a victim is from one ethnic group and a suspect from another, there's a natural pull toward an ethnic reading of events, and it's a pull he explicitly warned residents against. Where's the ambiguity and who benefits? The ambiguity is on causation. Every official statement concedes the clash looked ethnic: Yoruba victim, alleged Hausa killer, retaliation targeting Hausa-associated shanties, while insisting the underlying cause was criminal, not communal. That's not necessarily dishonest, but it is a framing choice, and it's one that serves every institution named above. It protects Oyo's investment environment, it protects the Hausa community from potential reprisal, it protects the Makinde government from a security narrative ahead of 2027, and it protects Ibadan's civic self-image as a historically tolerant cosmopolitan city.
Now, if what you just heard challenges what you thought you knew, drop it in the comments. I want to hear your read on this before we get to the part that reframes everything. Who gains and who loses from the criminality not ethnicity framing holding? Governor Seyi Makinde gains the most from containment. Oyo is a PDP stronghold in a region where the party's fortunes are increasingly fragile, and Makinde has positioned himself as a competent administrator ahead of 2027 calculations, whether in a presidential frame or as a continued power broker in the southwest. A viral ethnic pogrom in Ibadan narrative would be a direct hit to that image and would hand ammunition to political rivals inside and outside the state who'd like to paint PDP-run Oyo as unstable. The Hausa community in Ibadan, a population with deep roots but also periodic vulnerability during moments of communal tension, has a direct stake in the criminal not tribal framing holding because the alternative framing exposes them to reprisal risk in a city where they are a minority, however long-standing. Who loses? Anyone trying to build a narrative of rising ethnic hostility in the southwest loses ground if this is successfully contained as an isolated criminal matter. And there's a subtler loser: victims' families, whose grief and demand for justice risk being subsumed into a broader "let's not talk about tribe" messaging campaign that, however well-intentioned, can feel like a demand to move on before accountability is delivered. What's conspicuously quiet here? National-level ethnic advocacy voices, Afenifere on the Yoruba side, Arewa-aligned voices on the Hausa/Northern side, have not, at the time of this recording, issued major public statements on this specific incident. That silence is itself notable. In a political climate where every incident with ethnic optics tends to be amplified by advocacy blocs looking to score points ahead of 2027, the relative quiet here suggests either that the containment strategy is working or that both sides recognize the risk of being seen to inflame a local criminal matter into a national ethnic one. Zoom out from Ojoo, and this incident is a stress test for something bigger: how Nigeria's most ethnically mixed commercial hubs manage flashpoints in a climate where ethnic and regional tension is already elevated ahead of 2027. Economically, incidents like this, even when successfully contained within 24 to 48 hours, carry a cost. Ojoo is a transit and commercial artery. A shutdown, even brief, disrupts trade flows and commuter movement across Ibadan, and repeated incidents erode investor confidence in the state stability narrative that Makinde has worked to build. On security, the pattern is instructive rather than novel. Nigeria has seen this exact structure before: a personal or economic dispute between individuals of different ethnicities escalating into a communal clash, followed by a rapid institutional effort to reframe it as criminal, not ethnic. What matters is whether that reframing reflects genuine root cause analysis or is simply crisis management. If it's the latter, the underlying tension, competition over informal sector livelihoods like scrap collection, tricycle operation, and POS services in mixed neighborhoods, remains unaddressed and simply awaits its next trigger. For ordinary Nigerians, particularly those in the informal economy where this dispute originated, the implication is sobering. A transaction disagreement between two working-class men over what was likely a few thousand naira was enough to produce multiple deaths and days of instability for an entire community. That's a signal of how thin the margin for de-escalation has become in economically stressed urban informal sectors. This is a localized incident, so its international footprint is limited, but it connects to a broader pattern diaspora viewers should recognize: the periodic strain between long-settled migrant ethnic communities and host communities in Nigeria's major cities, a dynamic echoed in similar tensions across West African urban centers with internal migrant populations. For Nigerians in the diaspora, UK, US, Canada, South Africa, the relevant takeaway isn't alarm, it's pattern recognition. Incidents like this, when picked up by international or diaspora media without the nuance of the criminal versus ethnic institutional response, can get flattened into a simplistic Nigeria's ethnic tensions boiling over narrative that misses the more precise and frankly more encouraging story that state, traditional and security institutions here moved unusually fast and in unusual alignment to prevent exactly that flattening from happening on the ground.
Let's still man the other side of this. There is a real argument made by residents and some commentators that the criminality not ethnicity framing is a form of institutional convenience, that when the victim and the alleged killer are named along ethnic lines, and when retaliation specifically targets one ethnic group's shanties and property, calling it purely criminal is at best incomplete. That argument deserves to be taken seriously, not dismissed. A crime can be criminal in law and still carry an ethnic dimension in how it unfolds and who bears the retaliatory brunt. Officials denying any tribal coloration doesn't erase the fact that this dispute broke cleanly along ethnic lines once it escalated. The most common misconception circulating, though, is the inverse error, treating this as evidence of a broader Yoruba-Hausa war narrative, as some sensational framings, including earlier versions of this very story's title, implied. That's not supported by the facts. This was a contained two-neighborhood block incident with a specific economic trigger, met with rapid, coordinated institutional response, explicit traditional ruler intervention for peace, and critically, public statements from both community leaderships that there is no active communal crisis between them. The nuance being lost in the noise is this: the story isn't ethnic war has broken out in Ibadan. The story is a criminal dispute exposed how fragile intercommunal calm can be in a mixed, economically stressed neighborhood, and how seriously Oyo State's institutions treated the risk of it spiraling. 3 things to watch in the coming days and weeks. First, whether arrests translate into visible prosecution. If the state makes arrests but the case stalls in the courts, a familiar pattern in Nigerian communal violence cases, expect renewed tension the next time a similar dispute arises in Ojoo or a comparable mixed community. Second, watch for compensation or reconciliation gestures. Deputy Governor Lawal's tone suggests the government understands the reputational stakes. A formal reconciliation process between Hausa and Yoruba community leaders in Ojoo, potentially brokered by the Olubadan's office, would be a strong de-escalation signal. Third, watch whether national ethnic advocacy voices, Afenifere, Arewa-aligned groups, Pan-Yoruba or Pan-Hausa organizations, pick this incident up in the coming days. Continued silence suggests successful containment. Sudden amplification, especially tied to 2027 political positioning, would suggest this incident is being repurposed for reasons that have little to do with Ojoo itself. Escalation risk rises if prosecution stall, if a similar dispute recurs in the same corridor within weeks, or if political actors outside Oyo State begin invoking this incident in service of broader ethnic grievance narratives ahead of 2027. De-escalation is likely if arrests lead to visible, timely prosecution, and if the Hausa-Yoruba community dialogue Lawal referenced is followed through rather than left as a one-time photo opportunity. Over a 12-month horizon, the most probable outcome is quiet containment. This becomes a footnote unless it recurs. Over a 3-year horizon, incidents like this are a useful bellwether for how well Nigeria's major mixed cities are managing informal sector competition and ethnic proximity under sustained economic pressure. And that pressure is not going away. So, back to the question we opened with. If the facts on the ground looked exactly like an ethnic clash, why did nearly every institution in Oyo State move this fast and this uniformly to say it wasn't one? The most defensible answer, based on everything we've laid out, is this: because they've seen what happens when they don't. Nigerian communal incidents that go unaddressed in the first 48 hours have a well-documented tendency to calcify into narratives that outlive the facts that started them. Oyo's institutions, both political, traditional, and security, appear to understand that the actual danger here was never really about who started the fight. It was about who would be allowed to finish the story. This is not a prediction that Ibadan is safe from future incidents like this. It's an evidence-based read that so far the state's response has been faster and more coordinated than the underlying tension warranted, which itself is the story worth telling. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.